from Mark 8, verses 27 to 38. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer. He must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. He said all of this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wants to be my follower, let that one deny oneself, take up one's cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save one's life will lose it. And whoever loses one's life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit one to gain the whole world and forfeit one's life? Indeed, what can one give in return for one's life? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of that one, the Son of Man, will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father and the holy angels." Here we are in the middle of Mark's gospel, as Jesus pivots from teaching and preaching and healing to head to Jerusalem. And Jesus says, "If anyone wants to be a follower, deny oneself, take up one's cross, and follow me." Self. If we were to describe our true selves, honestly, what would we say? Not the self we'd like to be, or the self we might be in 6 months, or even the self others see, but ourselves of today. In Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, Palmer tells about his life story, his faith journey of listening to his life, hearing what his life has to say to him. He begins with a revelation he had. He had admired great figures of his youth and decided to emulate them, as he says, lifting up the loftiest ideals he could find and setting out to achieve them. The results of modeling, he found, were lackluster and embarrassing. He realized the reason that the results felt artificial was because he was living from the outside in instead of from the inside out. In effect, taking up other people's crosses instead of his own cross. He realized that taking up other people's crosses wasn't what Jesus was inviting him to do. Palmer tells of the Hasidic Rabbi Zusha, who said, "In the coming world, they will not ask me, 'Why were you not Moses?' They will ask me, 'Why were you not Zusha?'" Sometimes the directive to follow Jesus is clear and the path is obvious. Like in the game of tennis, sometimes that tennis ball comes right to the racket to hit it back. Wonder if that's ever happened to you. One time I walked into a friend's apartment and picked up the brochure from her coffee table, and the next thing I knew, I was at the School for Christian Education that it had advertised. Sometimes it seems like the clouds lift and the path is there, and we can step into it. But most often, we're chasing that tennis ball of faith, guessing in which direction to go, looking, wondering, wandering, chasing balls that seem just out of reach. Wouldn't it be easier to stand in one spot and just hit those balls that come directly to us? But in this life of faith, in this life of following, we're called to chase the tennis balls as well as hit the ones that come right to us. We're invited to follow, both when the clouds lift and when the fog is deep. Palmer confessed to a Quaker that he had waited a long time for the way to open up in front of him, and it just was not happening. He had no clear idea after all of his discernment which way to go in faith. He said that she laughed and replied that though the way had never opened in front of her, there were many ways the way had closed behind her, and that too had had the same guiding effect. What about us? What is our life telling us, both in the doors that open as well as the ones that close? Jesus invites us, follow me. Once when I was telling the godly place story of the Good Shepherd, I had the Good Shepherd lead the sheep to the good green grass, to the cool, clear water, and when there were places of danger, the Good Shepherd led the sheep through. This particular time, after I told the story, a boy said he was there with them. And I looked down and it's like, he's right. He didn't say, sheep, you go this way, I'll go this way. The Good Shepherd also didn't say, you lead, I'll follow. Everywhere the sheep went, the shepherd guided them, including and perhaps particularly through the places of danger. What if we're tired? What if, frankly, our head's not in the game? What if we might be embarrassed to say we just don't want to run to the other side of the court again because it didn't seem to make any difference the last time we did? Or what if we're afraid of what might happen if we stay in this game? Perhaps like Peter was afraid when he pulled Jesus to the side. I remember my son Christopher. When he was a young child, occasionally he'd want to show me something, and he would want me to follow him. And as he was leading, he would turn back and look behind him to make sure my feet were following him. And if my feet stopped, his feet stopped. And he waited until my feet started again. If it were evening, if I was distracted or tired, sometimes he still would want to show me something. He still would glance back at my feet and stop when I stopped, persisting in his quest to show me his latest creation or finding. And I learned after a while, no matter how tired or distracted, the best thing for me to do was to follow him. For during those times, I'd be rewarded by catching a glimpse of who he was at that moment of that snapshot, what inspired him, what delighted him. Looking back, I realize Christopher wasn't asking me not to be tired. Christopher wasn't asking for parental perfection. He was asking for my involvement in his life as I was at that moment. Jesus invites us to follow him. Jesus doesn't ask us not to be tired or distracted. Jesus doesn't ask for our perfection. Jesus invites our willingness, our efforts, ourselves. And unlike Christopher, we don't need to look behind us for the reassurance of feet following, but ahead, in front of us. Rachel Turner, whose series we're using for the Parenting for Faith class, that's starting in a couple weeks, she talks about guiding others through our own following. She's an educator in England who realized how powerful it can be to share the bits and pieces of our faith life with children of all ages. Not the perfection of being a follower of Jesus, not the when we're not distracted or now we have it all together, so now we're ready, but our lives as they are. Both when the path of faith seems to open up for us, like that perfect return on the tennis court, as well as the times when we scramble and search for glimpses of God in our lives, being us who we are right now as people of faith. Turner tells the story of a mother who decided to take Turner's class and to share her life of faith, including all of its bumps and bruises with her son, and what a blessing it was to both of them. When the mother took the class, she was 81 years old. Her son was in his 60s. Turner reminds us we can start now, wherever we are. Christopher, of course, is an adult now. No more than 6 months ago when he was home, he told me he wanted to show me something. And I felt a lump in my throat because sure enough, maybe just out of habit, he glanced oh so quickly back behind him to see if I was following him. It was a millisecond glance, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. And of course, I followed for a new snapshot of who he is. Thank goodness, as Leal Chus said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Even though the head can be full, even though the body can be tired, the feet can still follow, one step at a time. Jesus says, "Follow me." Just as we are, we can follow. Amen.